Bigsan and Seresh, the gatekeepers of Achashverosh, had plotted to poison him. After Vashti was killed, he was advised to gather all the women of his kingdom and choose the appropriate woman to be his future queen. He was a man who was fully sexually depraved, indulgent in this area on an abnormal level. The Talmud tells us that a person who's fully involved in this area is always thirsty. The gatekeepers, usually they take off time to nap, but they had no day, they had no night. They were continuously summoned to bring him wine because he had this unquenchable thirst because of his behavior. They said, we've had enough. They plotted to poison his wine, and that would bring it to an end, that he should have a peaceful night's sleep. They themselves spoke a language of a far-off land which they believed nobody would understand their conversation. It happened to be Mordechai was within the earshot of their conversation. And Mordechai, being a member of the High Court of Israel, was fluent in 70 languages. And he understood what they had said. He immediately reports the plot to Esther, the queen. She immediately shares this with her husband. It's found out, the two gatekeepers are hanged. It's recorded in the Chronicles of Achashverosh that Mordechai the Jew, Ayhudi, saved the life of the king. As time progresses, Haman rises in power, advances beyond any of the ministers of the kingdom. The Talmud tells us that in the history of existence, the two wealthiest commoners, the wealthiest Jew who was a commoner was Korach, who was a Levite, who was a cousin of Moshe Rabbeinu. And among the nations of the world, the wealthiest Gentile who ever lived was Haman HaRasha. You could imagine his level of arrogance, of megalomania, of what he demanded in terms of people should be subservient and serve him, although he wasn't the king. And being a descendant of the Amalekites, he wanted to extract a decree from Achashverosh to have the Jews annihilated, that there should not be a surviving member of that nation on the face of the earth. What he had done, he had deified himself. He put a statue of idolatry he wore on his chest, and he issued a decree which was authorized by the king that everyone must bow to Haman. We read in the Megillah, in the narrative of the story, Mordechai would not bow. He would not bow because it was considered bowing to idolatry. He became incensed and enraged. And he comes home and he shares it with his wife and all his cohorts, and he says, all the wealth and all the power and all the honor that I have is worthless because that one Jew is not willing to bow to me. Here he had everything in the world. This is similar. Amalek is a grandson of Esau, the Edomite. He had everything. He says to his brother Yaakov, you keep the gift that you want to give to me, because I almost have it all. If you almost have it all, you will never have it all. You will never have it. Yaakov says, but I do have it all. and whatever God gives me is only in addition to all that I have. Amalek, Haman, the wealthiest common who ever lived, but because Mordechai the Jew was not willing to bow, whatever he has is nothing, and he cannot tolerate it. So he's advised by his wife and all his cohorts, his intimate group, he should build a gallows, 100-foot gallows, to have Mordechai hanged on this. Immediately he goes to the palace to ask for an audience with Ahasuerus the king. In the meantime, that night, God did not let Ahasuerus sleep. He had a restless night. He immediately calls for his chronicles. He'd like to review them because he started to think, why did Esther invite Haman to her wine party, to her feast? Maybe something's going on. Maybe somebody's plotting to kill him. He was a little paranoid. Immediately, maybe he owes someone a favor, that he didn't repay that favor, and therefore, people are planning to assassinate him. And this is why he started to read through his chronicles. And sure enough, he comes upon a recording in his chronicles. Mordechai HaYehudi, the Jew, saved his life. And the information was communicated through the Queen Esther. At that moment, who arrives in the palace? Haman, with the request to have Mordechai the Jew hanged, because he's not willing to submit and acknowledge Haman. The timing is perfect. Here he feels he wants to reward Mordechai the Jew for his selfless service that he saved the life of the king. So he says to Haman, before he even begins speaking, what would you do for the man who the king wants to honor? So of course, being pompous, self-absorbed, this ego, eccentric human being, of course, he thought, who else is Ahasuerus thinking about? Honoring him. He says nothing less than the steed of the king. What else? The royal garments of the king. What else? He should be led by the leading minister through the streets and call out, whoever the king wants to honor, this shall be done to him. Immediately, Ahasuerus says to Haman, immediately take the horse, take the royal garments, and take Mordechai the Jew and mount him on that horse and lead that horse through Shushan, the capital city of the empire, and call out, whoever the king wants to honor, this is the way he's honored. What's the likelihood of such a thing happening? It's an impossibility. Here, the man who wants to bring about the destruction of the leader of the Jewish people, he's the one who's denigrated at a level of submission not to be believed. And he walks in at the moment where the king realizes that Mordechai was not rewarded for his exceptional service of saving the life of the king. And this was the beginning of the end. And when he comes back home, after he was disgraced to the nth degree, and he shares this with his wife, Zeresh, who was an evil woman, and her intimate circle. And she said to him, once you begin falling before a Jew, you will never rise again. This is the beginning of the end. She didn't know what the outcome would be, but she says, your meteoric rise is now in descent, and ultimately, it's not going to be good. And immediately, things went from bad to worse. He was invited to the party of Esther. And the Talmud says some miracles took place. And Esther made a second party, and she immediately, and until this moment, nobody knew she was Jewish. A miracle happened. Every person who had seen Esther prided themselves that she was from their ethnic group or from their nationality, because nobody knew what her background was. Somehow each nation, there were 127 countries, each one saw that Esther was their person. And at the party, Ahasuerus wanted to know in the worst way, who is she? What is her pedigree? What is her nationhood? And finally she reveals it, and he says, and if you reveal that to me, I will give you half of my kingdom. That's how he desired this piece of information. And she said to him, there's a man who's evil, who wants to destroy my people. And if it was only a question of servitude, I would not burden the king. But since it's a question of total destruction, this is the only reason why I'm making this request. He wants to destroy my people, the Jewish people. He says, who is that? He says, Haman, the evil one. Haman is shocked to the point that he's speechless. He's numbed. Ahasuerus becomes livid and enraged, and he storms out onto the balcony. And you could imagine the trees, the shrubbery around the palace. It was something magnificent. God caused an angel, while he was on the balcony, to chop down and destroy every tree in that orchard. Here he sees, he's enraged because of what he hears. He goes out, his kingdom is being destroyed. He's unaware of certain things. He comes back in. Haman realizes that his end is near. He goes and he pleads for his life from Esther, that she should not have him killed. God sends an angel and pushes the Haman onto the bed. Ahasuerus says, do you want to capture the queen in my palace, although she's my wife? When Haman heard that, he turned many colors, and he realized his life is over. And immediately he gave the order that he should be hanged on the gallows that Mordechai was meant to be hanged. Not only was he hanged, his 10 sons were hanged on that same gallows, all simultaneously. They all expired at the same moment. What's the likelihood? And Mordechai was appointed to be the viceroy of the kingdom. He took over the position, and he had a level of renown throughout the world because Ahasuerus became aware that Mordechai was Esther's uncle, not that he was her husband. What's the likelihood of all this happening? It's unheard of. If you'd write a script, you couldn't have written such a script. But God orchestrated a script which only God himself could do. Divine intervention, divine involvement, divine providence. Every moment of that period of time to display to the world, although I'm not obvious, as he was during the first temple period, where there were revealed miracles. But if you see the full picture, although God is cloaked in nature, his blatancy and his obviousness could not be denied and ignored.